This episode is sponsored by Dano Seasoning. Dano Seasoning is made with only the good stuff, and because they use no fillers, you get 100% real flavor in your seasoning bottle. This all-purpose seasoning helps you make great tasting food with ease, and is compatible with tons of cuisines and cooking styles. If you're on a diet, don't worry. Dano Seasoning is gluten-free, low sodium, zero carb, it's vegan, and it's also downright delicious, dare I say. It's great for paleo, keto, and Mediterranean diets because it uses all natural ingredients without the sugar and or the chemicals. Dano seasoning is the perfect ingredient to use before, during, and after cooking. You can use it before as a marinade seasoning, during to season your protein and veggies, and even after to add some extra flavor. Dano's was created as a chicken seasoning, but it is also a great steak seasoning or fish seasoning. It's great as a pork seasoning on beef or any number of protein substitutes. Try it on veggies, potatoes, even soups, stews, or sauces. I actually brought my bottle of Dano's that I got to the movies when I went and saw the new Elvis movie, and I put it on my popcorn. And let me tell you, the best tasting popcorn I've ever had. Dano's comes in 3 flavors: original, spicy, and hot chipotle. They've also recently released a Dano's flavored beef jerky. Get them all here at danoseasoning.com. Use the promo code Hodgepodge at checkout and receive a generous offer. Again, danoseasoning.com, promo code Hodgepodge.
There we go.
Cool, man.
Good morning.
Morning, dude. Thanks for joining me.
Yes, thanks for having me.
Yeah, man. So I'm here with John Bullard, and let me tell you how I kind of found you. It was actually fairly recently, man. There's this cool new crazy technology called TikTok, and this video had popped up about this one of the most haunted houses in our state of Mississippi, and it was and they're like they made a movie about it, a documentary about it. And it said check it out. So I went and I found it and I checked it out, and it's crazy how I didn't know about it. Being from Mississippi, yeah. I didn't know anything about it. So it's called The House in Between. It's about this house that this lady had built, and I'm assuming it's on some kind of like sacred ground. I'm assuming that's kind of how it is considered haunted.
Yeah. So, well, it's a good point you made too, because with The House in Between, and we'll kind of backtrack in a few minutes, but it went global. The first one, it was a blessing that we put out The House in Between, and Steve Gonzales from Ghost Hunters, producer, Kendall Welton, his wife Vera, co-producers and editors. They make it all magical. But the way that it was put together, this was not your traditional paranormal documentary, because
right.
It's not jump scares. It's not just fully paranormal. And really, Alice, Steve and Kendall and Vera wanted to tell Alice's story. So this is more of a human interest story on Alice and her journey and her story, mixed with a little paranormal, mixed with some science as well. And I think when you put all that into a blender and kind of make that recipe, I think that's why The House in Between had so much success. But it is crazy because we'll see people from all over the world, Brazil and Ethiopia, and like all over the world watching the film. But yes, there's so many people just in Mississippi who still don't even know The House in Between exists. So it's neat to see how far you can reach, but then how much is still left to be seen. It's cool to have the success, but it's only a small fraction of the world who's even knows The House in Between exists. So, and also, so on the house, so the house was built in the 90s. So not your traditional 1800s house. It's not a Victorian mansion. It is a red A-frame house, a beautiful house, and it definitely stands out and has a personality all its own. But yeah, so we learned that. I've been doing the house on and off for 14 years, which I have a very short attention span. So for something to hold my attention that long is it's always evolving and always changing. But yeah, I mean, the house was built in the 90s, so we automatically assumed and had a hunch that it was something associated with the land. And if you do a deep dive, which part 2 does a really good history of the town of Florence, Mississippi, but also the town burned twice. So there's so much documentation that a lot of places have that Florence doesn't have because all the records burned. But we are able to kind of dissect and understand a little bit more about the land and why what's happening is definitely associated with the not the brick and mortar.
You did mention that, and it is true about how it's not your typical paranormal it's not Ghost Adventures. It's not Ghost Hunters where things are happening, the first 10 minutes. It's really like a slow pacing, like I imagine like I kind of put it like kind of like a Friday the 13th. Like it's very slow pacing. It's trying to get the story across. And then once it happens, it's like, oh man, like it makes it one of the best. And I think that's what's great for it, because it happens. And then you're like, you do science. You're like, okay, well, tell me, the science behind this, is it, the science about it. And then you go into kind of investigating, and then you take a break from investigating. It's all evenly paced out the best way it could be, I think, because once something really does happen and you're like, oh wow, you're not taken you're taken aback, and you're not like, yeah, but didn't we just see this like 10 minutes ago? You know what I mean?
Right. Yeah. And I think with part 2 coming out, I'm really excited about it, because we did open up the paranormal aspect a little bit more. And obviously we bring in some more experts, which Steve is, Kendall and Vera were great to bring in. Dustin Pari from Ghost Hunters International and Elizabeth Saint, who's amazing. And there's a lot more meat and potatoes in the second one, and it's a little bit more fast paced. But, the first one, I say they complement each other so well. So I always tell people, definitely go watch The House in Between 1, because it's almost like a great origin story. You get to get to know myself, Brad Cooney, Alice, and really understand the origin of what's happening. And part 2 really does a great job of kind of diving deeper. And so we filmed part 1 in 2018. It released in 2020, right when COVID hit. And I think that was another reason we had success too.
Right, it's a good thing, right?
House, so they had,
right.
Yeah. So just that's a roll of the dice, kind of like winning the Powerball a little bit. But then we continue to investigate even when filming Rafts. We're always in the house trying to set up experiments, and I believe in part of my chapter 1 in my book that I wrote was teaching the spirits. And it's almost like we've been in the house so long, and it's a blessing that Alice opens the house up to us like she does, because it's almost like a laboratory in a sense. We can spend so many times with experiments set up with the house untouched. Nobody's in there, and we're doing one thing after another. And if you watch part 2, you'll see a good kind of several examples of us teaching the spirits, asking for specific objects to be manipulated. Not just random, but something that let's all focus our conscious energy on it and see if we can get a response. And we're still evolving and still taking that further. But yeah, again, so to long-winded as I am, watch part 1 and bleeds into part 2. And I think if you watch them back together, I think you're going to be pretty excited about it. And again, it's not your jump scare, but this is real. This is all authentic. This is raw evidence. And having Steve come in, which is, he's a skeptic. Steve, the reason we brought him in is we wanted to open up the house to anybody who could show us a rational reason of what was happening. Because we knew what we had, which was a true authentic haunting that was the most consistent thing that I've ever seen in my career. And that's what happens. We have people come in and nobody's been able to tell us why yet. So that's exciting.
I mean, let me ask you this, and we'll kind of, like you said, we'll backtrack and we'll do a little bit more into depth here. But when Alice reached out to you, whoever reached out to you, was there ever, because I'm pretty sure with any paranormal investigator, you're kind of thinking, these people think it's a haunting, but it's like a raccoon in the basement or a raccoon in the cellar or something like that. Kind of, what was your reaction going into the house versus coming out of the house?
Yeah, great question. And so traditionally, I started doing paranormal investigating in 2008. I got into it because I had experience as a child. I would see shadow figures, hear voices. I'm not a medium, never claimed to be. I think there's people who have a skill set. I also think there's tons of people who don't have that skill set, who really muddle that whole genre profession. But I traditionally did investigations at historical places. I'm selfish. I wanted to investigate places that I enjoy and I like. I love history. We traveled all over the country. I've been to Jamaica to do investigations. Really, it's fun to travel. It's part of the experience, and dive into the history and learn what's folklore, what's true, and then do an investigation and just review the evidence for yourself. I did a few private residence investigations years back, and we had a very, very bad experiences. One lady I went to was actually in the state of Mississippi. I won't say where, but she called and said she had some activity in her house. She was a single mom, 2 kids. So we created a questionnaire, and we kind of asked the same questions but different ways to see if their story would change.
Right.
Before we ever did an investigation, before we went to the house, whatever. And she kind of passed all those check marks. So we drove down there. It was about 2.5, 3 hours away from where we are here. And man, I got to that house with my two people, and the house was the nastiest thing you've ever seen. Child services should have been called. I felt horrible for the children. And after that, man, I tell you, like, I was like, I'm not doing, I don't want to do any other private residences. And so that was a bad experience for me. And then also, you know, if you do go to a private residence and you have somebody who's got an authentic haunting, that's something else that you have to take account of. Like, if somebody is that desperate to open up their home to you, to have a stranger come in and try to figure out what's happening, that's something you got to take seriously as an investigator. And it's just something at the time that I just didn't want to do. I wanted to do it for myself and enjoy what I was doing. But with Alice, a friend of a friend reached out to me and was like, hey, this lady is really sweet. She's a retired psychiatric nurse. She doesn't know what's going on. And the house wasn't that far away from me. So I was like, let's take a gamble. Let's go check it out. And meeting Alice for the first time, as she comes across in the house between 1 and 2, you can tell she's genuine, she's authentic, and she's one of the kindest people that I've ever met in my life. And I mean that. But she was genuinely terrified. And it helped because I was doing a little interview with her on her couch. And the first 20, 30 minutes, it was less than an hour I was in the house, I had an experience myself. So that automatically validated the house for me. I didn't tell her that until years passed, probably a year or two ago. I just told her that story. But on the first one where the ball is moving and manipulating, I saw a dark shadow figure move up the wall when I was in her house. And I just saw it out of the corner of my eye. I was like, that's different. It just happened so quick. It's almost like it just like sideswiped me, punched me in the side of the face. I was like, okay. So we initially went back and did an investigation. I caught some incredible audio, which is one of my favorite things. We use analog and digital recorders. And I find capturing raw, silent EVPs one of the most fascinating things in the field, obviously, besides things moving.
Right.
But, you know, and with Alice's house, we've been able to document the same male and female voice over several years. So it's like your fingerprints when you get arrested. I always tell this story. They fingerprint you because your fingerprints are unique. Your vocal tone is also unique. So there's actually software and things you can do when you capture audio. You can overlay it and it can almost match up perfectly. So while to break Alice's house down, for people who don't know, we believe it's kind of like a spirit hotel, spirit portal, as crazy as that sounds, because there's always different energies whenever we come in there. And that's why it's so intriguing, because sometimes the house can be a little bit more aggressive. Sometimes it can be silent, but it can go 0 to 60 in 2 seconds. You know what I mean? There's still a male and a female that we've captured throughout all the time we've been there. So it's like a big jigsaw puzzle. We've been able to put several pieces together, but there's still some that's still missing.
You know, the first one was, for me, the creepiest thing was you guys put a baseball on the stairs, and then it just kind of out of middle of nowhere just rolled off. Like nothing was touching it, nothing was by it. I think you mentioned, or somebody mentioned in the documentary, that it was even like the house was alone. Like there was no one in the house, and the ball just happened to move. And I can tell you, not from experience, but I can just tell you from the weight of a baseball, there's no way a fan or an air conditioner can move that, you know, that heaviness of a ball. And it was also sitting there for however many days or hours it was there, and it just all of a sudden moved. So when you see that, are you thinking, okay, we have some type of poltergeist here? Because isn't a poltergeist like a noisy ghost that takes things and throws things and makes itself known?
Yes, and great question. There's so many layers to that. So with the baseball, I'll backtrack to the chandelier that's in the film as well.
Okay.
So, you know, I talk about teaching the spirits. So I was in the house investigating for several years before we realized that the chandelier could be manipulated. I was doing an EVP session one time in a chair. The chandelier was behind my back right here. And I asked the house, it was just me and one other investigator at the time, and Alice was not at the house. But I said, do you miss Alice? Do you wish she was here? Because she's obviously a good trigger name. Whenever she's at the house, we tend to get a little spike of activity. But when I asked that question, I got a shock to the back of my neck, and it went from my neck down. It was almost like if you like touch an electric fence or one of those bug zappers, you know, it shocks you. I mean, it shocked me to where I jumped up out of the chair and landed on my knee. The other guy was like really freaked out. I didn't realize at the time the chandelier had turned off at the exact same time. So in my head, I'm like, my little mouse wheel spinning. I'm like, okay, did they drain that energy and shock me? It's one of those things where like you want it to happen again, but then you never want it to happen again.
Right.
So then that's when we started focusing on the chandelier. I'm like, okay, well, you did that once. Let's recreate that and let's try that again. And then ever since then, it started turning off. And predominantly, it would only turn off if we were in there investigating, actively asking questions. And you see in the first film, we have a electrical person come in and check the wiring and all that stuff just to do our due diligence on it. And then forward to the baseball. So then that's where my head was like, okay, well, if they can manipulate something, turn something on, off, whatever, let's challenge, let's step it up a little bit. And the reason we used the baseball was a few different reasons. A, it's heavy, like you said. And then B, it's got the stitching on both sides. So I wanted a focal point on whatever object we're shooting so we can see if it pivots or turns, which it has also. And the baseball was about 6 months before the first time it ever fell. So,
Really?
you say that and people were like, oh, yeah, 6 months. So people were like, oh, that's cool. But you don't think about it. 6 months is a lifetime every day because we have the house monitored with cameras. And I always say the definition of insanity is doing the same thing and expecting different results, right? Except in the paranormal field, because as you see in the documentary, the first time it came down, there's it's like a dark mass kind of moves up the wall, and then boom, 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 it came down. It was like a kid on Christmas getting your bike you wanted. I almost cried when we saw motion on the camera and we saw the ball came down. It was incredible. And then the more interesting thing about the baseball is once it happened the first time, boom, it started happening again. And now it's kind of like a consistent thing. It's like once whatever is there learns how to manipulate the object, it's like it's on the checklist and they can do it to interact with us now.
When you say that, like how it learns to manipulate things, I picture the movie Ghost with Patrick Swayze. Like, Remember how it took him so long to grasp a penny? And when he finally did it, he started grabbing things and realizing, oh, I know how to do it now. That's kind of what I picture when you say that. Is it kind of, well, I know you can't really say for sure, but is that kind of like an accurate perception of what you're saying?
I'm going to give you an air high five there.
Okay.
So that's always my analogy. I always tell people, one of my favorite paranormal movies, I said it's not even really a paranormal movie, is Ghost. Because that is an accurate trail of what I think that they're going through. Because I remember the paper cup, he kept pushing his hand through it. He couldn't figure out how to move it, penny and all that. But yeah, I mean, because in reality, it makes sense. I mean, there's something there that's intelligent. We hear the voices. We've got the EVPs. We've seen the chandelier. Now we've seen the baseball. And obviously we've continued to push that forward. If you see in part 2, we're focused on different stuff. The climax, the end of part 2, which I obviously will not give away. If you've seen part 2, I've been working on that situation for about the same, actually a little longer than the baseball. So, I want to continue to challenge the press forward, not just to see if we can get things to move, because yes, it's cool, but like, what can we do to actually have a conversation with what's ever there? So our minds are always evolving. We're always thinking outside the box, and it's cool to use the paranormal tools. We use the REM pods, we use the voice recorders, but we also use a lot of scientific experimental stuff that's not really paranormal. And some of it works and some of it doesn't. But I think if we can continue to think outside the box, throw paint at the wall, and some of it may stick and some of it may not. For example, if you watch the first one, one of the biggest thing in the first documentary that gave me chills was when Jill, the medium, was in there, which is fantastic. She's awesome. She was talking about fire and the town of Florence burning, and then all of a sudden the smoke alarm goes off. And I can tell you, I've been investigating the house on and off for 14. Well, I've been investigating for 14 years. That smoke alarm has never made that noise. To this day, I've never heard it do that. So when I was, because I didn't see the final result till it came out, and I just watched that, I got chills all over my body. I'm like, because it makes no sense because it's never done that before. But it's almost like ding, ding, ding. You hit on something that's relevant. So it's the house is exciting, man. It really gives you the passion to go and put the hours in, but it's a lot of work and it's a slow process. And I think the reason we've been able to document what we have is because we have endless time in the house. And that's what it takes. Traditionally when you go investigate a location, you go investigate for a day or 2 days and you're out of there, and it's impossible to get the things you want to get in that short amount of time.
Yeah. I want to share a story, and then it's going to lead to a question I want to ask you. So you mentioned that when you were 8, you started seeing like shadow figures and all these different things, and it kind of what brought you to believe it. But I used to live in a house that, you know, was built in probably the 50s or 60s. It was a good while ago. It was my great grandfather's house. You know, neither of them died in the house; they died in the hospital. But we lived there maybe a year or two after they had passed when we moved in, and I remember seeing just these like a person just walk by the door. There's no window in the hallway. There's nothing like that, and so you're thinking, oh, I'm home alone. I'm, 15. Mine's playing tricks on me. What's happening? But then, what was crazy was me and my brother would share a room. And to this day, I don't know what it is. I have to sleep with my closet door closed. But my brother one day just woke up screaming because he saw something or something in the closet. It was just one of those things that I had never really experienced before. Like the TV would turn on and off. The channel would turn from this channel to another channel. Weird things that you wouldn't think would be paranormal turn out to be, they actually 100% probably could be paranormal. So my question in that is, when you were 8 and you saw these different apparitions, et cetera, you had to be thinking, my mind's playing tricks on me. And when did you actually believe that, I'm actually seeing something here?
Yeah, great question. So I was young. I would say between 10 and 12. So my grandfather, my family was from Brookhaven, actually. So I'm from Clinton originally. So I would go to Brookhaven in the summers and stay with my grandfather. And he owned a salvage yard, and he did like estate sales and whatnot. So we would travel all over states to places, and he'd clear it out, and I would help him, this, that, and the other. And that's kind of when it spiked up. The houses didn't have to be big Victorian places. It was just random houses that would be in one time, or just whenever it would happen. But there was one house in particular one day. It was like a 2-story house. It wasn't fancy, but it was probably in the 20s or 30s. It was an older house. It was just him and I at the house, and he was outside loading some stuff up. And I would just never forget. I heard chatter in the next room. It was 2 people talking. So I thought somebody was in there, and I walked in there. There was nobody in there. And then all of a sudden, the same chatter like basically shifted and moved upstairs. And then I saw shadows walking back and forth. And I had noticed things throughout my childhood, but that was one of the most predominant things that just kind of stuck in my head that I never forgot. It just imprinted on me. So I never told anybody because I was a young kid. And then, what are you going to tell your grandfather? I think there's ghosts here, or I see shadow figures. So I never told anybody. I kept it bottled up. And as I got older, I started, when the internet became a thing, started Googling places and looking at supposed haunted sites, like anywhere close, like Chapel of the Cross is in Madison, Mississippi, or King's Tavern, which King's Tavern was the first place I ever investigated back in 2008. It was one of the oldest buildings in Natchez, if not at the state.
Really?
So I wanted to put myself in places that were supposedly haunted to see if I could validate what I experienced as a kid. So when we went to King's Tavern, 2 of my friends came with me. They didn't believe in anything at all, but I didn't want to go by myself, so they were supportive. And we went into this location. I went in with the whole wrong viewpoint of it because I wanted anything to happen. Right. I wanted something to validate what I had as a child. And we were in there for hours and nothing really happened. And it was probably the last hour or 2 of the night, but we had a door open, and then I caught a very, very clear voice. And there's especially a young woman that haunts the location. And we got a couple EVPs of a young girl just on an old analog recorder. And ever since that night, I've been on a trajectory to validate proof of life after death. And marketing is my day job. So I wanted to show the people who are not into the paranormal, not in this genre, that there are things that are out there. And, you watch stuff on TV and you see it and it's cool, but some people are like, well, that's TV. So my thing that I want to do, especially local in Mississippi, is I just wanted to go to these places, do everything I could to get raw evidence, and then highlight it, post it on our website. We would do like short audio clips, short video clips, because I know people's attention spans are short, especially with TikTok nowadays. This is before TikTok, but I just wanted people to be able to click, listen, and be like, oh, that's cool and interesting, and move on. So that's kind of what started me on my path. But yes, it was a long time in between when I had that and when I validated it. But once I actually validated it, here I am, 14 years later, still doing this stuff.
And I'm sure being in Mississippi, parents are they were like, yeah, right. You're watching too many movies. You're watching too many shows. There's no such thing as ghosts. Kind of, did your parents or whoever ever really believe, or they just kind of, okay, I'll believe you because you're my son?
Everybody was pretty supportive. I was so focused. I had tunnel vision, so I honestly didn't care what anybody thought. Because at the end of the day, I knew that what I was going to do was, if I got evidence, great. I mean, we would go to 15, 20 places and not get anything. That's just part of the journey. But there are certain places we'd go. There's a place in Meridian called Mary Hope Mansion, which is a beautiful place. But there are certain key places we were going and getting some really crazy activity, like doors opening, voices. I'm like, so I knew the evidence we had. I knew how authentic and real this stuff was. So my whole thing was like, I like skeptics. They keep us honest. But when you capture raw audio, which I say is one of my favorite things, when you have a spirit voice intelligently talking back to you or saying a word, you have to have a conversation about that. If it's not fake, then you have to have an open conversation about, okay, if it's not a ghost, is it interdimensional? What is it? And that's kind of kept me on my path. And I've always been respectful too, because again, even you could show somebody, I mean, you can watch The House in Between and you can see these objects moving almost on command. And there's still people who would be like, well, that's not
100%.
And that's okay.
Yeah.
And that's okay. Everybody, it's like religion. I'm not going to force my politics or my religion or my paranormal on you. You either believe or you don't. And sometimes you just have to have a personal experience yourself in person to change your view. And we've done tours at the House in Between. And everybody's always been nice, but we've had several skeptics that have come in with people who are into it. And it's funny, we've had several people who leave and their whole mindset is just changed. You can tell when they leave, they're confused because it is not rational and their mind is trying to rationalize the things that happen, but sometimes you just can't. And it's cool to see that,
Yeah. I want to tell you a story and I want to get your thoughts on it. Okay. This happened a year ago. So right now in the studio that I'm at, this was my mom's mom and dad's house, right? Her dad died. I was 5 years old. So I don't really remember the guy. I just remember he smoked cigarettes and my mother has a jewelry box that she keeps locked with his last pack of cigarettes and his lighter in it. I'm telling you, John, one day we're sitting in the living room and I just go like this. I smell something, right? I don't say anything. I smell something because I'm thinking, damn, am I having a heart attack or something? I don't know. And then Mom looks at me. She goes, do you smell smoke? And I said, that's what I smell. She goes, you're smelling something. I think you're smelling smoke because I am too. And I said, yeah. And, we go on about our day. I go into her room. I'm getting something was happening. I go into her room and I just happened to look to the right of me. And on her dresser, where her jewelry box is, the jewelry box is locked, still locked, and the pack of cigarettes and the lighter is out on her dresser. Like someone had went in there, took the cigarettes out, and laid it there. And I know for a fact no one was in there because it was just me and her. And it was one of those freak out moments. It was crazy to me. So my question is, have you ever heard of anything like this? And if so, is it normal with loved ones that have passed away?
Yes, and that's a story that will never leave your head. That's something that will imprint with you, and you will
100%. It is in my head 24/7. It's like, man, I can't. Like I'm home alone. And it's like, what's gonna happen next? I'm walking in their house. Oh man, is someone gonna trip me? You just never know. Because you don't know what it is.
Well, and that's a good point too. And a sub point of that, and I'll go back to your story. So that is, people ask me or ask Brad and Amy, when you go to that house, are you scared? It's not that we're scared, but you learn to respect the house because you know what it can do, and then you don't know what you're walking into. So same thing with the story here. It's like that happened to you, so now you're like your antennas are up and you go in there. So because you respect it, because something's happened before, so you have to watch your six at all times, basically. But yeah, I have heard of things happening like that, and it's things that just it doesn't make sense, but it's there. It's physically in front of you. So like, even though it doesn't make sense, the reality is those cigarettes were out. even though that's locked. So it had to happen some way. But I do think that smells, whether it's perfume, whether it's cigar smoke, cigarette smoke, you hear about those. And I think that and this is my opinion, I'm just one paranormal investigator, but I do feel like in times of need or just random times, whenever somebody feels like, I feel like that we are able to travel back in a sense and leave some kind of notation, whether it's like a butterfly, whether it's dimes on the ground, whether it's cigarette smoke, because that's attached to that person. Whatever our identifying traits are, I feel like there's ways that we can come back and leave notations of that to get our loved one's attention. I think that that's possible. And I say that because you hear so many stories all over the world about that happening. And maybe it is coincidence, but it just seems like it happens so much. It's just like when somebody dies, right when they pass, you hear about somebody like your grandmother passes, and then you wake up and you see her at the end of your bed and she had died like an hour before, whatever, like you hear those stories consistently. My wife is a hospice nurse. When we got married, she wasn't really into the paranormal, but she dove into it with me. But the things that she's seen as people were dying and like calling out to people and just like descriptions, like right before they pass, it's like, I mean, how can that be coincidence? So you have to open up your mind and realize that we don't know everything. We're not meant to know everything. Yeah. But hearing, and I think that as we're so connected now in 2022, because in 2008 it doesn't seem like that long ago, but it is. Like we've come so far forward with just being connected on everything that you hear so many more stories than you used to. And if you put all that collaborative stuff together, it really does paint a clear picture of kind of what we're dealing with, and that there is some kind of life after death. There's some kind of intelligence. We're all made of energy. So there's absolutely possible, cigarettes that are locked up shouldn't be able to get out of a box. A ball that's on a ball that's on a stairs should not be able to be pushed down the stairs on command. Those things shouldn't happen, but they are. So, we're just trying to do our best to try to rationalize and verbalize what's happening.
So we'll go back to the house in between, because I have a couple of questions about that here in a second. But I do have a question for you, and it's this. I heard that, here's my interpretation of what a ghost is, and I want to know what you think your interpretation is of a ghost. So I heard this a while ago, and it makes the most sense to me. When a person dies and they can accept the fact that they're dead, their spirit goes on, whether it be heaven, hell, if you believe in afterlife, whatever that may be. Ghosts and or demons are the ones that can't accept that they're dead, or there's a mystery behind their death. They don't know how they died. So they're staying behind, whether it be that the kids can't live without them, or just the fact that they can't accept that they're dead, they're staying around.
Yeah. I mean, I think in a nutshell, that's pretty accurate to everything. Okay. I mean, so another movie this need, which Michael J. Fox is one of my favorite actors, but The Frighteners, which is a cool movie. If you haven't watched it, definitely go check it out. He's a paranormal investigator. Go watch it. You'll be like, that's a cool movie. Sorry, 1 second.
You're cool. Well.
Sorry about that.
No, you're cool.
That was, we'll just say that was paranormal. But no, yeah. So The Frighteners, great movie with Michael J. Fox, but people have the opportunity when the light happens to cross over, or if there's something that's traumatic that's happened, they want to understand what's happening, or they can't come to the realization that they have died. They stay around. And so there's two types of hauntings. So traditionally there is intelligent and a residual. So residual haunting is almost like a broken record. And I don't know if you're getting a background noise. I guess somebody's doing work in the yard behind me. But with the residual haunting, it's like you think about a hand on a cold window pane. You take your hand off, and the handprint's still there. There we go. And with intelligent haunting, obviously, that's somebody who can interact with you, communicate with you, talk to you, move objects, this, that, and the other. And the question is asked a lot of times also, like, what are orbs? And it's so kind of misconstrued, because a lot of people want orbs or dust or particles to all be spirit based. I do think there's definitely something in there with the light anomalies. So we've been able to document, just like Ghost Adventures has, Ghost Hunters, that these objects that are actual light anomalies have hit our devices and they've spiked up temperature, they've drained batteries. So there's some kind of energy source attached to these orbs, these light anomalies. And again, that's a part of the reason we do investigations at night. Yes, it is scarier, more spooky, but IR picks up all these things that you can't see in the daytime, and
Right.
It just helps validate what we're doing. So if we get an object that moves, we get an EVP, and then there's a light anomaly at the same time, anything you can connect the dots to, it helps validate what we're doing. But your analogy of what a ghost is pretty accurate, and I think some of those light anomalies with some of the shapes that they form is almost like a partial manifestation. And obviously, one of the holy grails of paranormal investigating would be a full body apparition, which had been captured before. And I believe Ghost Adventures documentary they did before they had their show. I think they're in Nevada somewhere, but some of the most compelling evidence that I've ever seen.
Let me tell you something, dude. That I actually own the documentary, all the seasons of Ghost Adventures. But that documentary, I think, is better than the entire show because it captures so much in like a 90-minute program, like the fact that the boards were just swinging it and tried to throw it at them, and then the cool thing about it was you're thinking, oh man, it's got strings attached or something, you don't know, but then they take it to like a video editor and he proves that, hey, look, there's nothing attached, this is real, and you're like, oh man, it's compelling stuff. But that leads to the question is, what do you think of these paranormal shows that are on right now? Because there are so many of them. And it's like, are there that many haunted places in America to go to?
Great question. And I think the answer could be yes. There are all over the country. I mean, supposed haunted locations. Now, with the TV shows, they serve their purpose. I think that, Steve with Ghost Hunters he was really I call him the OG because they were some of the first investigators on TV. And they're still running, Ghost Hunters is still a thing, but it really put paranormal into pop culture and it made it more acceptable. Sure. And it opened up the interest to a lot of people. So I think that they definitely serve a purpose. Are there concepts that are awful? Yes, definitely so. And they usually don't last. I remember there was one concept that was like redneck paranormal one time. There was like some hillbillies that were like, so I mean, there's, some of that's like gimmicky, but there's some really cool concepts out there, and I think Ghost Adventures does a great job. One of the longest running shows that's been out, and the things that they try, and the theatrics. You get people to watch it because it's exciting to watch. Yeah. And these people have got some really cool fan bases, and it's opened it up. And the beauty of the paranormal field is anybody can be an investigator, and that's also a blessing and a curse because you don't have to have a degree to be a paranormal investigator. But it's also muddled and dangerous because the reason the science community doesn't take any weight of what we capture is because there's so much non-true evidence out there. People are kind of doing a disservice, and they don't mean to. I don't mean to put people down because when I started as an investigator, I didn't know what I was doing either. You kind of learn as you go. You can watch things, you can test things, but I would always give a note to learn the equipment that you're using. It was an honor working with Elizabeth Saint because she is very hard-nosed. She's an electrical engineer. She builds equipment and really understands the XYZ of why things work and, what's the cause and effect. And instead of just buying stuff that's mass-produced and just being like, ooh, a light went off. Is there a ghost? Do more deep dives than that. So, yeah.
You mentioned gimmicky paranormal shows. There was this one that I saw, man. I don't remember the title of it, but they can tell how long it lasted if you can't remember it. They had this little glass container, and it looked like a rat trap is really what it looked like. And they're like, if you're a ghost here, there's a balloon in there below, and the balloon will blow up and pop, and we'll know you're real. And I'm like, a human couldn't even blow that much force of a wind to blow that balloon up. So what's a ghost going to do? Right.
Yeah. It's like, hey, here's a piece of chalk and a chalkboard. Give me the E equals MC squared. You know what I mean? Like,
right.
Let's be real.
So going back to the house in between here, man, as we kind of wind down here, when Alice, so do you think, and this is going to be just a blunt question because I have no other way to put it, do you think this house is feeding off of her?
So with the house, it's interesting. Like I mentioned before, there's different energies that are in the house at different times. So could that be a possibility? I think yes. If she goes to the house and she'll check the mail and she'll hang out and she may have friends over. She just doesn't stay at the house overnight because she can't sleep. There's dramatic things that happen just even in the day where it just scares her to, the house when you're in it by yourself is a totally different mindset. And that's with any location. But, if you're in there with somebody or a group of people, you're not as scared. You're more relaxed. But if you go to any place that is really, truly haunted and you're by yourself, your antennas are up and you are a lot more cautious than you are. So when she's in the house, there's been times where I feel like, something may be affecting her. She's there for long periods of time. So to answer your question, possibly, I don't think that's out of the realm of possibilities. And I mean, the reason she left initially is because she wasn't getting any sleep. And you can imagine working, because she's a psychiatric nurse, working long hours, coming home, being exhausted and scared and not sleeping and having to get back up to work. Like insomnia is a real thing. And you start to go stir crazy. So in turn, would that be feeding off her? Whether they meant to or not, I think the answer is kind of yes on that.
So kind of what's a little bit of background on Florence? Like, I know you mentioned that it was burned down a time or two, but what could be, we mentioned the burial ground. It could be, built on a certain burial ground, but what could be the possibilities that this could just be the most haunted place in America?
It's open, and like I said, Florence, the town itself, is touched on a little bit in the part one, but really, Kendall, Vera, Steve, everybody did a great job. Morgan Gates, who's actually a Mississippi native, he narrates the story of Florence in part two and does a great. He's got like a Morgan Freeman type voice. He could just sing me a lullaby or read me something and put me to sleep. But he does a good job on it. And it's unique though, like I said, because most cities, even Vicksburg, which is a Civil War battle city, has good documentation and records because they didn't lose everything. And Florence, again, didn't burn once, it burned twice, and they lost all their records. So Mary Alice is in the documentary 1 and 2. She's 95 or 96. She's the town historian. So, luckily she's still alive. So she has an account of things as they've grown. But Florence, had the train depot, and it was kind of a bustling city. It's interesting to see some of these small towns in Mississippi, but back in the day, they were doing very well. And we do a deep dive on that, so I won't give any spoilers on it, but watch 1 and 2. And, I'll say this, where the house is located, about 0.3, 0.4 miles up the road is a massive cemetery.
Okay. So part two, I haven't had a chance to watch it. I didn't know it was out until actually this morning. I was looking at your notes that you had sent me.
Yeah.
But cool.
Watch part 2 and let me know. I think you watched part 1 and you enjoyed it. I think you're really going to love part 2. So if you watch it today, let me know. I'm interested in your thoughts.
Where is it? Like, is it streaming anywhere? Is it Apple or you can buy it on iTunes?
I can plug it now. Here we go. Yeah, so it's on. I think it's on like 26 platforms. So yeah, easiest thing to do, I always tell people to go to just go to thehouseinbetween.com, and it's on Amazon Prime.
Okay.
It's on YouTube TV, Comcast, Dish. Pretty much, if you have internet or Wi-Fi, you can watch it. So go to thehouseinbetween.com, and it'll tell you where to watch the first one and the second one.
Okay, cool. So I'll actually tell you this, guys. If you haven't seen the first one, it's actually streaming free over on YouTube. That's where I saw it the first time, because it was in my related searches or something, and I happened to fall upon it. But with the success that you guys have had with The House in Between 1 and 2, actually, I read that it like shot straight to the top of the charts. So with with the success of that in the little state of Mississippi, have you had like people reach out like, hey, I want to come do something there. We want to come investigate there. Kind of, has there been an outpouring of reaching out?
Yeah, for sure. After the first one hit, the first one was different because it was a new. I kind of call this the brand now. Alice's story is, and it's cool to be able to have so many people see Alice's story. And honestly, side note, like to see her confidence when we first met Alice. She was kind of embarrassed. This is Mississippi's Bible Belt. Right. She didn't want people to think she was crazy. But to see her confidence from the first film to where we are right now is awesome. I mean, it really is. It sounds corny, but it is neat to see that her confidence, and she's almost like a celebrity in her own little town over there. But yeah, when the first one came out and started having success, we had a lot of people pulling up to the house and walking around the property. So we had to get some signs out there, and we got the house monitored outside, front, back, side. Always joke around and say, this is the worst house to ever break into because there's like 30 cameras that are going to be shooting at you as soon as you walk in the house or on the property. But yeah, so but to your other point, yeah, we've had local people ask to come to the house, but we have people all over the country. We had, I mean, just the other day, since part 2 came out, we had people from Michigan, Iowa. There was one from California. We did a Halloween event at the house last Halloween. We had a couple drive down from New York. So it's pretty cool.
And so this leads to kind of my last couple of questions for you. What is one of the biggest or the most frighteningest, besides the house in between, besides Alice's story, place that you have investigated where it's just like he totally destroyed you and scared the legal shit out of you?
Yeah. Somebody always asks, or a lot of people ask, what's the place you'll never go back to? And I do have my place. And again, I wrote a book. I'll plug that too. So I wrote, It's called A Peek Through the Veil, my first book. And I don't like to read, but I wrote a book. So it's pretty good. I like it.
Where is that at?
Where's
the book available?
So if you go, so if you can go to John Bullard PARA.com, you can order the book through that. It's on Amazon.
Okay.
But the book is heavy visual. So I have 33 original pieces of art in the book. And it's pretty neat. And this is the cool thing about social media. I knew that I wanted dark charcoal sketches, basically of things that I have experienced. There's one painting or one drawing in the book about the chandelier. I told you the story. You'll see that in the book, the visual representation of it. So I just like a lot of heavy visuals to go with the story, and it's an easy read. It's very informative. It's almost like a paranormal handbook if you're into the paranormal, but it's also really cool with some stories and stuff like that as well. One of the chapters in it is called Doppelganger, because I think that's something in the paranormal that people don't talk about enough, which is a spirit using your voice. So a lot of times if you're in an investigation, you may hear somebody who you think's talking, but it sounds like Amy and I, when we're investigating, we've heard her voice before, but I luckily had cameras on both of us, and it absolutely was not her. But in theory, if you're telling the spirits to use your energy, why would they not use your vocal tone as well? So that's a chapter of the book. I kind of went off on a tangent there. Let me ride back where I was. So yeah, the book's there. What was the original question?
Question was, what's the biggest or the one that scared, the question everybody asks.
So, and that, yeah. So and that's in the book. So that one of the chapters is locations. I chose 7 locations, I believe, but the location that I will not go back to, that if I was to experience what I experienced at this location, I just wouldn't do the field because it's not worth it, is Villisca Axe Murder House. So if you don't know the story of Villisca, go Google it, and you can hear the horrific things that happen here. Villisca Axe Murder House took the Titanic off the front page. That's how big the story was at the time. Right. But when I went to this property, we went in December to Iowa. I don't know why I went in December. We're an idiot. So anyway, but the way I describe the anxiety that I felt in Villisca Axe Murder House is, my funny analogy that I always use is, you're 16 years old, you're dating your girlfriend, you just found out she's pregnant, and her dad's a 6'5" Marine. And you got to go tell him that she's pregnant. That's the anxiety that I felt inside that house. And I've never had a night terror before. I know what they are, but I've never had one. And I fell asleep upstairs at some point. I woke up screaming. And it was interesting to review. I actually didn't stay in the house the whole night. I was in there for probably 4 or 5 hours on and off. And then the rest of the night I slept in the car. But then reviewing the footage, it was interesting. And I still have this footage. The entire time I'm doing sessions and stuff, it was probably 20, 30 different times. There's just light anomalies just shooting in my head. It's every room I go to, there's just these light anomalies, and there's 2 other people with me, and they're fine, but these light anomalies just keep jolting like in my head. So I don't know what the relevance was on that, but apparently they pegged me, and I'm not aggressive, but I am the person who leads the investigation usually. And I feel like sometimes I can come off as like aggressive, even though I don't mean to, just because I talk loudly. Right. And it's almost like it did not like my presence. I was not welcome there. But, a paranormal hangover is a real thing, because after you do an investigation, you're drained with your energy. But when I left Villisca, for the next several days, I just didn't feel right. I didn't feel good. I almost felt sick. I did not like that experience, and it may just be that time that I go, because I know people visit Villisca, and the thing is with these very popular places like Myrtle's Plantation or Winchester House or Waverly Hills, we know that they're haunted, but you can go sometimes and you won't really have a lot of activity, because again, you can't say, all right, at 11:30 we're going to have a full body apparition walking down the stairs. It's all kind of just subjective and just random when it happens. But the night that we went to Villisca, it did not go well for me.
You mentioned that, like, you can't put a time stamp on when something's going to happen. And I think that's what I love the most about ghost adventures and probably and ghost hunters as well, is like just random times things will happen. And it's like, it's like other shows, not hating on other shows, but it's like other shows that do the paranormal thing. It's like, they're always in the house. They're always doing something when something happens, instead of like, taping cameras down and they hear something, it's just amazing what paranormal can do. Like, like they can do, it can do things that no man could think of.
Yeah, for sure. And I'll tell you, watching the first film and what happened at the end of that first film is like catching lightning in a bottle. Steve and Kendall were wrapping up and Brad was at the house, and to have what happened in front of Kendall happen is amazing. It's almost like the house is working for us. I know that sounds crazy, but it is. And Kendall Welton is incredible. So is his wife. Kendall was one of the camera people on Ghost Hunters for years and years. So he's well versed in the paranormal. But that was one of the most dramatic things that ever happened in front of him. And again, it's such a short batch of time. Like, you can't force things to happen, but that happened. And when you watch the second one today, watch the full length film, and at the end, it's almost like the house. We don't have all day. We don't have 6 months to film, but it's like the house works for us, and you'll see what I'm talking about again. So it's like, you can say it's a coincidence until it happens so many times. Where how can you say it's a coincidence?
So is there a chance for part 3? I know it's too early to tell, but because it's always a house. It's always something new happening. You mentioned.
Right. Yeah. And, when we filmed part 1, we didn't ever have the thought of doing a part 2. We didn't know how it would be received. And obviously you can't do an extra one or a part 2, part 3, whatever, unless it's successful and people want more. So I think when that's asked, it's like, is there more story to tell? I think so, but let's just see if people are intrigued enough, they want more story to tell. Because the reason part 2 came because we had such an outpouring of, hey, what about this, and this? We want more of this. And, if Alice is still not comfortable in where she needs to be, then, Steve's there, Kendall's there, Vera's there, Brad, Amy, myself. So as long as she's still needing help, then we're still going to do that. But we'll see how people respond to part 2, and then fingers crossed.
So I asked the last question. I asked the question that most people always ask you, or just any paranormal investigator. But what's a question that nobody ever asks you as a paranormal investigator?
That's a good. Nobody's asked me that question.
2 birds, 1 stone.
Let's see here. 2 birds, 1 stone. What's the question nobody ever asked me? Okay, here's a question that I've thought about. And actually, not to keep talking about the book, but I wrote a chapter in my book. The last chapter of the book is called "Where Does the Journey End?" And I've been doing this for 14 years. Obviously, I don't do this full time, but I've experienced some incredible stuff, and it's a blessing to have success with House in Between and House in Between 2. And is there a point where I feel like I've done all I can do, and I've captured all the evidence that I can capture? And is there a peak where this just isn't something that I enjoy anymore? And do I walk away? And, I've thought about that. And honestly, if it wasn't for Alice's house and this journey and everything that keeps happening at this house, I think I probably would have left the paranormal a few years ago. Just because I enjoyed it, but I feel like I hit my peak at a point of, like, I validated it. I set out on this journey to validate this for myself, and I did that. And I've gone to a lot of places that I wanted to go all over the country, and
Yeah.
what else is next? But then every time that I wanted to step away, and this is true, something dramatic would happen at the house in
Yes.
between where it
Yes.
would suck me back in, and I'm like, well, crap. And now here I am. So, but that's something people don't ask me. Do you think you'll ever stop investigating? And it definitely has crossed my mind. But now where I'm at right now, I'm kind of rejuvenized, and I'm kind of like fired up, I guess, to continue the journey.
No, I understand, because kind of like the podcast, I'm like, man, it probably ran its course. But then once you think that and you're thinking about the next steps, something happens and you're like, okay, let's do an interview, let's do a podcast. It's the same thing towards anything. But yeah, John, look, man, I thank you for coming on the show, man. I know it was just an instant.
Thank you for having me.
It was one of them. I hit you up on Facebook, didn't know if everybody was going to respond, and here we are doing this. So, House in Between 2 is available now. Go watch 1 if you haven't seen it. Go get his book, A Peek Through the Veil, which is available. You mentioned Amazon, and all your information is going to be in the episode notes below. So, but cool, man. Thanks for doing this, dude.
Thank you so much. Watch part 2, and then let me know what you think. And if we want to do a follow-up, and I can bring Brad on, or we can get some people on there, we can do a part 2 update.